Hi, I'm Zach Childs, and welcome to the Truetone Lounge. Today's guest is one of the most versatile and hardest working guitar players in Nashville. You might find him on a Carrie Underwood session followed by a Cheap Trick session, and then on the weekend he might be out on tour with Faith Hill and Tim McGraw. He is one of the consummate sidemen and session guitarists who truly knows the art of supporting the song and the artist instead of putting the spotlight on himself, Mr. Jerry McPherson.
Hey.
So Jerry, tell me, how did you originally pick up the guitar?
By the neck. I grew up in Texas, and my stock line is, had I grown up, it would have been in Texas, but I squandered the opportunity. But I was born and raised in Dallas, and my mom played piano and organ at the church. And so we were at the church all the time. And so I tried to learn to play piano, because I grew up with a Hammond B3 in the house. It sounded amazing, with the big Leslie and everything.
Yeah.
And I never connected with the keyboards. It's kind of like the layout of it or something. It's like whoever invented the piano, it's like he obviously mainly had white keys to deal with, and then he was like, hand me some of those black keys, and he was, all right, I need some more white keys, and give me 2 more black keys, and there, that ought to be it. I never could wrap my head around the layout of it. And then I thought, well, the guitar's a little bit more laid up pretty well. They missed it on 2 strings, but everything else is pretty much,
because of the weird, where all of a sudden you go to, and now we're going to do a third.
So they got 4 out of 6 right.
Yeah.
So I ended up with guitar, and the way I ended up picking up guitar, my older brother Rick got an acoustic guitar for Christmas, and in fact, he got a guitar and an instruction book, and I found one of those instruction books on eBay. Can I show it to you real quick?
Sure.
All right, sorry. Yeah, I found this, and it's basically a chord book, and it's got some theory and stuff in it. And I just gobbled this thing. Here, I'll do a Ken Burns. Live Ken Burns movement there. But I ended up learning all these chords and stuff, and felt like I was getting pretty good, and was able to start hearing stuff on records. It's like, hey, that's that chord progression or whatever.
Yeah.
But I had a really terrible acoustic that had to belong to my brother, because we didn't have a lot of money, and so anytime you get an instrument in that pay grade, it's going to be a terrible instrument. So after that, I ended up getting a terrible 5-string banjo. My dad fancied me being able to play the Beverly Hillbillies theme.
Yeah.
Never got there.
Yeah.
And I took lessons for it. And there in Dallas, it was a mall, big town shopping center. And there was a music store. And there was a instruction studio above it. Mm-hmm. So I would, go, and you had to wait for the next student to come downstairs, and when you heard somebody come downstairs, then you would head up with your banjo, And I would sit in that music store, and I wasn't into the banjo. I liked rock, and banjos, come to find out, don't rock, and neither bad acoustic guitars, they don't rock, And my mom also got me a ukulele, and it didn't rock either. So I would go into this music store to wait my turn to get a banjo lesson. And there was this guy, Randy Adams, and he's still around. He does live recording. He's done a lot of famous live recordings around the world. But Randy Adams, he worked at the music store, and he would take like an SG or something, and the Boss Tone Fuzz, remember those little guys that would clip into the guitar?
Yeah.
I'd be sitting in the music store with my banjo, and he would whoop, 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 and I was just like, why do I have this banjo? I didn't even have a case for it, so it was kind of like, I have a banjo, which made it even more embarrassing.
Made him even more hillbilly.
Yes.
With a banjo.
But we did have shoes. So I took banjo lessons for a while, and then the big turning point was my dad, Tex McPherson. We lived in Texas. His name was Tex.
I love it.
Yeah. He was a car salesman, used car salesman, and he had taken in on trade for a car. I'll never forget, I can still see the pickup truck that he pulled up in front of the house. It was a Gibson SG, 60s Gibson SG, a Fender Super Reverb, a Showman cabinet, big like 215s or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
Oh, it may have been 12s. And a Boss Tone fuzz, a wah pedal, and he brought it home with the full intention to sell it, and he saw me latch onto it, and he and my mom were just like, oh God, because it was loud and proud, and I had a fuzz tone, and that was my rig for first few years. But I realized even at that age that guitar wouldn't stay in tune, and ended up jettisoning it and getting something without the whammy bar on it. So
Yeah.
But that's really how it was kind of like a little bit of preparation, from being on my brother's terrible acoustic guitar, and then my dad bringing home that gear.
How did you decide that you were really going to make a go of it?
I never thought in terms of making a go of it.
Really?
I just wanted to play.
Yeah.
My sister took me to my first concert when I guess I was 13, and it was Rare Earth. And they were playing, she went to school at East Texas State University there in Texas, and that's in Commerce, Texas. So I went there, and, their guitar player for Rare Earth is playing a Gibson SG like the one I had and everything. It was just, everything that I saw just kind of like kept lining up with, I enjoy this and I should be doing this, But what happened was, we got to remember I was in the church, got good enough to be in a band with some friends, and we got good enough as a band to start doing clubs. And my parents were like, and no, you're not doing clubs. I was young, and so I had to quit the band, which was a drag, and basically just play in the church, and it was pretty unexciting because at that time the church didn't rock, So I guess I should have taken my ukulele.
Yeah.
But it kind of set the stage for me to stay in on the instrument and not just play rock stuff and just do clubs and get crazy. And I think ultimately, I'm really glad that they made that decision to keep me out of playing clubs and stuff.
So when were you making a living playing music?
Well, there was a guy at my church. His name is Kirk Dearman, and Kirk ended up moving to Franklin from Texas, oddly enough. But way back then in the 70s, he had heard me play there at church and knew of a session there in Dallas that needed a guitar player. And so he recommended me for the session. And I was 15. So my sister Pam had to drive me to the studio because I didn't have a driver's license. That was pretty embarrassing, but I had made her pull around the corner, and I carried my super reverb, and I had a Gretsch at that point and hustled everything in. And so I was 15, when I did my first session. And then, played in some bands and stuff after that, but it wasn't until 1980 that I started, I was like full-time starting the summer of 1980. And I worked at a label down in Houston called Star Song Records. I'd gone to college. I wanted to go into solar energy. I've always been science-minded, and I've always been fascinated with solar energy. But you couldn't just major in environmental studies. I went to school at Baylor University. You had to double major, so I picked geology. So I thought, the government doesn't get behind solar energy, I'll work for a petroleum company. I'll go to the dark side,
Yeah.
But I kept getting called away so much from school to play on sessions. So I ended up switching my major to business, and I got a marketing management degree. So got out of college, went down to Houston, and helped manage the studio as far as booking time for people, and helping a little bit with the accounting books, and playing on sessions. And started that full-time in 1980. And started playing some clubs there in Houston. And then a friend of mine that I'd met, they would fly him in from Los Angeles. His name is Keith Edwards, great drummer. They would fly him in from Los Angeles to play in all these sessions. He started touring with Amy Grant. So when that slot became open, he recommended me for that gig, and that's how I ended up with her.
Yeah.
And you know, because I went to Baylor University, it's in Waco, Texas. There was a label there, Word Records. They ended up moving here to Nashville. So when it was all said and done, I was living in Houston, but I had a gig in Nashville, and I knew more contacts in the music industry in Nashville than I did in Houston. So it was it's a pretty easy move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so Amy Grant needs a guitar player.
Yeah.
And instead of getting someone, you know, from
Nashville,
that's already in Nashville,
yeah,
you know, because the drummer recommended you,
yeah,
you know, you know, so did you audition for it? Did you?
Well, what happened was I was in a really good band at the time, and you know, we basically did covers and stuff, and it was a little kind of a jazz, but it was just a cool pop band and really good players.
Yeah.
Our sax player Everett Harp, he's gone on to play with everybody. He lives in Los Angeles and has a solo career. Our drummer Pat Bouts, he's been with Three Dog Night for ages. It was a really good band, and Amy's husband at the time, Gary Chapman, he and some friends were going to Galveston or something like that. They were going to do a beach trip.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had a Winnebago, and they drove through Houston, and Gary was going to come in, but he didn't fit the dress code. I'm like, this guy's auditioning me. We got to let him in.
Yeah.
But he had sneakers on.
Mm-hmm.
So I was standing outside by the guy guarding the door, and I said, Gary, what size shoe do you wear? And he said 10 and a half. I'm like, all right, let's trade shoes. Because I could wear anything.
Yeah.
So we traded shoes right there, and they let him in. And so, and so he watched us play that night, and afterwards we're all sitting around, and somebody said, so they started asking him, so this tour coming up, you know, who else part of it? And he goes, you, and he pointed to me. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I got the gig, you
Yeah.
know. So it was a good
good
little audition.
So Gary Chapman goes and sees you play,
Yeah.
hires you for the gig.
Yeah.
Now people can find this on YouTube. There's footage of you playing on Hee Haw with Amy Grant, and so you're performing the song
Angels,
you know,
yeah.
and so you can see that lineup
With the floating guitar.
Yes. So you have a classical guitar. That's
It's an
on a stand.
Ovation classical.
Yes. And you've got an electric strapped on. And
Yeah.
I think you know,
Hair. Had
Yeah,
hair.
you had some hair.
So let's see, the guitar, the acoustic guitar, the hair. Yeah, I had it all then.
Yes. And it looks like Tom Hemby's playing bass.
Tom Hibby's playing bass.
Gary Chapman's playing as the other guitarist.
Yeah, and we were playing through little Galen Kruger solid state amps.
Yeah.
It sounded terrible.
And the best part of the song is that there's one point where you all pause and freeze in place.
Hey, you've got some dirt on you, I'm sure, somewhere, right? Crack open YouTube.
I'm sure there is, but it's wonderful. So, but the point is that getting back to it, you know, you went,
Let's get back to it.
Yeah, you went from Houston, Texas, to all of a sudden you're on national television and you're playing with a big act.
Yeah, and a really nice act too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
You can't call Amy an act, but she's a very wonderful person. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That
And
was
so,
good.
So tell us, what were, all of a sudden, you're playing clubs, and then all of a sudden you're playing much bigger venues. You're playing, with pro sound and everything like that.
Yeah, we had Claire Brothers.
Yeah. Was that jarring?
It was
How much of a transition?
not much of a transition, and so, a lot of people that have done the road stuff have done, tours where you're like playing a club tour.
Yeah.
I never had to do that. I was able to hop in and get on a pretty decent tour with tour buses, everything. We had several buses out.
Yeah.
It was really good, and it was jarring, and the money wasn't amazing at that point yet.
Yeah.
It got where it's like, yeah, this is a good gig, but at first, like I would. The classic story. You go on the road, and as soon as you leave, everything breaks back home. The car breaks down.
Yes.
The dryer goes out.
Yes.
So I would come home and try to fix everything or replace it, and then go out on the road so that more things could break.
Yes. Yeah. Your wife blows a tire on,
Yeah.
on the interstate.
She
Yeah.
dropped the transmission in Dallas, Texas on a loop thing, and it was awful. It was awful. And at that point, that was before, are you ready for this? Before cell phones.
Yes.
And so you would do the thing where you're in a hotel room and you would call home and then hang up, and they would know to call back. Because if you stayed on the phone at the hotel, it'd be like a $90 call or something.
Right. Yeah. But it was a much better rate if you had your wife or family member call you back from home.
Yeah, it's way better now with cell phones.
Yeah. So the following tour was the Unguarded, which was a huge record for Amy.
Yeah, it was.
And all of a sudden you were playing even bigger venues.
Yeah, and playing really great TV things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're playing the Grammys.
The Grammys, yeah. And that was amazing in that, you're backstage. That was the year that Tina Turner won for What's Love Got to Do with It.
Yeah.
And they had me go to makeup, and I'm sitting in a chair, and then in comes Randy Newman, and on the other side is Henry Mancini. And Randy had won in a pre-show award for scoring The Natural, this movie, the Robert Redford movie, The Natural.
Baseball.
And Henry Mancini was up for some movie that he had scored. So the two of them were talking, and Henry's saying, "Hey, Randy, great job, congratulations," and stuff. And I'm in between the two. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
But I talked to Randy for a little bit and got out of there and told the fellas what had happened. Then I went down to get in my seat, which was at the very end of the front row, but at the very end. It was not a great seat. And there was a camera set up. And I asked the camera guy, and he said, "Yeah, we're doing an opening shot where this camera will be here, but as soon as the show starts, it'll move and you can have your seat." And I'm like, okay. So I'm standing around, and Randy Newman walks by, and he goes, "Hey, what's up?" And I was like, "Oh, there's a camera in my seat. There's a camera in my seat." He goes, "Well, here, come sit with me." My wife didn't want to come. So I'm on the front row sitting with Randy Newman, and Pat Boone is emceeing. John Denver was emceeing. And there was Bruce Springsteen and Boy George, and right there. And sitting directly behind me was Tina Turner.
Yeah.
So, that was getting back to going from clubs to playing venue. From going to clubs and stuff to being around, that kind of stuff. It's kind of like, all right, this is really different.
Big A-list, performers.
Yeah. So it was a lot of fun.
You had mentioned the Galleon Kruger amps that you were using. So by the time of the
I used that on Hee Haw.
Was that what you were using on tour also?
That's what they provided us with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
it was state of the art at the time.
It was state of the art. So were you using like some pedals along with the Galleon Kruger, or were you just using? Because I remember the Galleon Krugers had like built-in chorus and maybe some channel switching
and some verb.
Yeah.
It was basically like a Rockman with a solid-state power amp on it.
Okay.
Yeah. But I probably had some pedals at that time because I've always had little pedal boards, and before that, I remember I built a pedal board, and I took a pig nose, and I've still got that pig nose, where I took the back half of it off and mounted it in the pedal board, so it was like also a practice rig.
Yeah.
And so it sat up on top, and it looked pretty cool. But I think I had a little pedal board just with a bunch of Boss pedals.
Yeah.
Great for the road and easy to power up, and cost efficient.
Yeah, and we're using the Strat with two singles and a humbucker and a Floyd Rose?
No, this was a little bit before that. Okay. This was the EMGs,
okay,
the Golds, and I still got that guitar with the Floyd Rose, the obligatory Floyd Rose.
Yeah.
And so your back pickup sounds were always a little thin, but you didn't kind of know it at the time.
And so now you're having to replicate what was on the record,
right?
And so you're replicating stuff by like Dan Huff or John Goin?
John Goin, yeah. But mainly Dan Huff, but also John Goin. And then they would cut a few things out in Los Angeles, so there'd be some other guys, some other players.
Like Unguarded, I remember there's Paul Jackson Jr.
Paul Jackson Jr.
playing some of his little popcorn funky guitar things.
Yeah.
And so then live, again, you've got to replicate these sounds that are all kind of rack tones.
Yes.
And that go from the really big, overdrive sounds to the super cleaned chorus that are kind of small sounds.
And I ended up, I'm not sure where in the progression, but I ended up with a Bradshaw rig.
Okay.
Just what you would expect. Huge refrigerator of stuff, but really great, it was great gear.
Yeah.
And then several amp heads. This Marshall head was one of them that was in there. It's a plexi head. It's 1967 50 watt. And I had those going into Harry Colby boxes, into a switcher, into the custom audio. And that Bradshaw rig also allowed me to go direct for that real spanky, clean, poppy thing, and I had two Clare Brothers wedges, which are the best. They're basically like the Marshall 412 of monitors. They just sound amazing. They sound great. And I had everything running in stereo. It was a good setup. And Dave Graff was my tech back in the day. Yeah. He was awesome.
So again, you're mainly you're touring. Now you are doing some sessions at this point, kind of on the side, but you're not yet playing on Amy's records.
Right.
But with Lead Me On, the Lead Me On album, that was the first album where you were getting to play along with Dan Huff on the album.
Yeah, and so what happened was my family was still in Houston, but I was coming up to Nashville all the time. So I kind of did a pre-move up to Nashville and lived at Amy's farmhouse with them for a few months. They were very sweet to let me hang there. And the cool thing is that in the basement they had a stone room. They had a studio set up down there, 24 track and all sorts of gear and stuff. So I would go down there and just kind of put together musical ideas and play it for Amy, and she ended up writing to them, writing lyrics to them, and they ended up on Lead Me On.
Yeah.
So, and also Brown Bannister came to Gary, myself, and Amy and said, I need a song that's kind of in the vein of Till Tuesday's Coming Up Close. So we ended up writing 1974.
Right.
And that was the first song on the album. And then I wrote all the music and everything for a song called Wait for the Healing, and which featured an instrumental at the end and it's Mark O'Connor playing through a Tweed Deluxe, ripping on an electric violin solo.
Yeah.
And it was in 5/4 at that point. How many times can you do 5/4?
Yeah.
So, and Amy and Wankert Patrick, I think that was maybe their first time to co-write together, but they wrote the lyrics on that, and then another song called If You Have to Go Away, and Amy wrote the lyric for that. And so I ended up on the record, and this was before I had all the big rack stuff. Mm-hmm. And they brought Dan Huff, who was living in Los Angeles at the time, and Robbie Buchanan, massive keyboardist. They brought them in from Los Angeles, and I remember, and this was 30 years ago, their cartage bill was $10,000 just to get their gear there.
Right.
Not them and not to pay them, but just to get their gear there.
Because it all had to be flown in.
Yeah, had to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a lot of gear.
It had to be flown into Atlanta and then trucked from Atlanta to Nashville, and then back to after the dates and stuff were done. So but I had a little bitty rack, and it squeaked when you push it. So I'm like, I go down to the Bennett house, and and I'm like, oh gosh, and I go in there, and I'm like, it's the Hall of the Mountain King, all these keyboards and all these guitar racks and stuff, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I wheel it out of there, and grab that Marshall head and a Vox AC30 normal. It's a 1964, I think.
Okay.
That and a few pedals, not even a pedal board, and I'm like, this will be the ground that I stand on.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't compete.
Right.
And I was able to find some sonic space, because everyone else had all the grandiose stereo stuff covered, and I was able to find my little bitty spot in there like that.
Yeah. Listening to that album, you can hear that there's a huge sonic difference in between. You can hear the big racks in, and you can hear the more amp type sounds.
Well, and that was one of the things that always bothered me. It's like we have these huge rigs, and the rigs sometimes were huger than the sound.
Yeah.
And they were very clean to a fault.
Yeah. They were very wide sounds.
Very wide, yeah.
But they kind of lacked mid-range.
So they didn't always cut, so you had to really bring them up. And then you'd have somebody like The Edge in U2, and his guitars sounded huge.
Yeah.
And part of it, he was using amps that were breaking up with delays going into that rather than delays after it.
Right.
And it was just like, wah, wah, It's like, okay, lesson learned, you know.
So speaking of Edge, let's talk about the track "Lead Me On." So "Lead Me On" was one of the first, kind of non-U2, guitar tracks that kind of had that dotted eighth note repeat on it that was utilized in a way, before it became kind of cliched.
Right.
So when because anything that gets overdone, by so many different musicians and on so many records over a 20, 30-year period, it starts to become a cliche, except for the Edge himself.
Right, and that part, that dun, 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 that was played by Dan Huff.
Okay.
He came up with, in fact, we tracked it one day, and then the next morning when I arrived at the studio, he had gotten there earlier, and he is replacing his part just to kind of fine-tune it a little bit more. I guess he couldn't sleep that night over it or whatever. I thought it was amazing to begin with.
Yeah.
But, it is one of those things to where, and it was this way for a lot of Amy's music, he would basically play it one time, and then I would play it 400 times.
Yeah.
Because I'd go on the road with her,
Right.
and we'd end up, did a live record with it and stuff. And so that was where my vocabulary of playing came from, was somebody would play it one time, I'd play it 400 times, and it was under my fingers at that point.
Yeah.
So I would come back to town, and somebody would lay a chart in front of me, and I was like, well, I can do this, I can do this. Or would you like me to do this? I'm going to try this. This is what I want to hear.
Yeah. So at first, you're kind of, you've had to learn this vocabulary from, let's say, Dan Huff.
Right.
And you've had to play it hundreds of times out on the road. And so then you've kind of got some of that vocabulary, and then you're applying that to other sessions.
Right.
And of course, inserting yourself and kind of making it your own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Making it my own,
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I wanted it to be a little rougher around the edges. Dan is a world-class player, and everything he plays is like camera ready. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
He's unbelievable. Just his touch, and that was one of the great things, is that I started to be able to do double dates, sessions with him, and we're sitting there, and I can just watch his right hand and see. I'm hearing what I heard on records, but I'm seeing how he's attacking the note.
Yeah.
The thing about Dan is that every move he makes on a pick, there's no wasted.
Yeah.
If he's moving the pick, he's got a reason for it.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Very economical playing, and very purposeful. Very focused. So I love that I had that kind of, mentor or whatever to draw from.
What are some other things you learned from Dan?
Well, just as far as effects, you can go overboard with effects, and I also credit my girlfriend with this. because I see this in her cooking, is that you have a guitar and an amp, that's a tone, okay? You start adding these little effects in, and it becomes a sound.
Yes.
And I learned how Dan used effects, and not to overdo it or underdo it, or when to overdo it for, to make a statement with a delay bit or whatever.
Yeah.
But just like in cooking, you add a little bit of this, 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 boom, boom, and maybe cook it a couple of different ways, and you're eating something, you go, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm eating, but this is the best thing I've ever eaten. And you've eaten all those elements before.
Right.
You've had all those spices. But instead of just blowing a bunch of curry on it and going, I'm having curry,
Yeah.
So that's the way I try to attack some things. Little nips and tuck tonally here, little bit of a slap thing here, along with a longer delay. I've always had 2 or 3 delays on my boards because it'll be a little bit of this, a little bit of that,
Yeah.
a little bit of compression. Is it compressing? Only I know, Is there a little bit of modulation? Maybe. And you end up with a sound.
Yeah.
Instead of, just shang, gang, 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 gang,
With a ton of tremolo or delay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So then you're continuing. You're beginning to get more into session work at this
Yeah.
point
Yes.
because of the experience of playing on the Lead Me On record. Now more people are hearing you on record, not just live playing with Amy.
Right. Yeah.
And so who's starting to hire you?
Well, I still had a lot of people from Texas that had moved up, from Baylor,
Yeah.
that had moved to Nashville. So I had contacts there. I wasn't doing any country stuff. This is one thing I wanted to touch on, is that you get ready, you gear yourself up so when you get called for a session, you're the right guy.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's good to be the wrong guy, too. To show up and you add a bent to it that they didn't see coming. They're like, whoa, that's brown shoes on that black tuxedo, but I kind of like it.
Yeah.
But mainly you're gearing up to, hey, yes. Did you bring up? Yes, I brought 2. You're ready, you bring this gear. But there's another thing that we do as guitar players. We also, and not just guitar players, anybody in life, we build little shrines of where we want to be. Give you a case in point. When I would put gear together, it wasn't so I could be the perfect Nashville session player. In the back of my mind, it's like, what if Peter Gabriel came to town and needed a guitar player? Because I was enamored with his music. It's like, I'm going to gear up like Peter Gabriel could walk in the room, and I'm ready for it. And also, I can take some of those sounds that are a little more off the wall or dark and put it on some of this pop stuff, and it's kind of like the wrong guy in the right way, So building your little shrines to, if you were ever to make it big, or there's not always, sometimes it's wishful thinking, but sometimes it's also, it sends you in a direction that you normally wouldn't go. And instead of just, zeroing in on what gear you need or technique and stuff, it's like, I'm going to come from this angle, and you're coming in almost, not as an artist, but you're coming in with a different way of looking at a song. So I've always thought in terms of, what if Peter Gabriel were coming in? What if David Bowie were to come into town?
Yeah. So,
and they never did.
But did that ever create problems for you?
No, because I had the straight ahead pop thing pretty dialed in.
Yeah. So you were prepared to do some left of center things, but if the producer starts reeling that back in and not liking it,
right.
you're prepared to go over into the more.
Yeah.
It's a horrible word, but more
the dark side,
the more homogenized, session guy thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and there's a comfort for some people in that, and then there's a discomfort for some people. Charlie Peacock is a great example. If things are too down the middle, he's got to stir it up.
Yeah,
he will stir that pot. He'll want some of those influences and things from other things to drift in, you know. So there's producers out there that are looking for that and want that, you know.
Yeah. When I was doing research for our interview, I found an old Guitar Player magazine article where you were only talking about gear. And it was very interesting. It was from about 1995. Had Frank Zappa on the cover.
Wow. Oh yeah.
And
Okay.
it was a number of Nashville session guitar players, and you had the biggest section, and you were talking about your rack that combined rack effects along with pedals.
With pedals, yeah.
And then even talking about your live rig with Amy at the time that was like a Marshall JMP1 preamp with a
Oh, yeah.
GP8 processor,
Yeah.
and you had a cabinet that was under the stage, and y'all were already using in-ear monitors
Yeah.
in '95 or so.
And that particular tour, we were in rehearsals, and we had a keyboard tech who had been out with, I can't remember who he was out with, some huge, name. And he had this huge keyboard rig off to the side, and I noticed that he was running a computer, a click track for every song. And I'm like,
Yeah.
are we using that much stuff? And he goes, no, it's just to keep click track, and every once in a while, we're going to use live strings from the recording date. We're going to have it where they can pump it into the PA.
Yeah.
And there's some percussion stuff, but everything was pretty much live what we were doing.
Yeah.
But there was a computer running on everything. And I'm like, I'm going to have this computer control everything of mine then. And this was back in the day where before we were really doing that, and I had a bunch of gear that would MIDI up. I had a GP8, a Roland GP8, it was Roland GP8, that had a little wah in it that the wah could be controlled via MIDI.
Yeah.
So we did 4 weeks of rehearsals, and then everybody left. I did 3 days of programming on my own with a Mac Classic.
Yeah.
I remember those.
Yeah.
Saved my 3 days of work to a floppy disk. And flew to, I think, to San Francisco for tech rehearsals, for 2 weeks of tech rehearsals, and handed the floppy disk to the keyboard tech. He's like, great, imported it, and it controlled volumes, it controlled delay sends, Leslie speed, wah-wah. I didn't do a thing. And it never failed.
This is very forward thinking on your part, because that's more of the like the guitarists on tour with Carrie Underwood and Taylor Swift have those kind of rigs now, but with fractal audio and things like
where
that.
everything's switching. Yeah.
But that in 1994, 95, to have that type of system.
Yeah.
And
Well,
to
the floppy disk will tell you that.
Yeah.
Is that
Yes, and the fact that you could just go out there and play, you didn't have to worry about doing any tap dancing at all.
It was wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good way to go.
Yeah.
And on this side of it, like I say, it never went down. I had a volume pedal out, and off stage I had a pedal board in case it did go down. But I just ended up never having to touch the volume, never having to touch anything.
Yeah.
No.
Fantastic. At what point did you leave Amy Grant's tour and start focusing even full time on just session playing?
Well, she ended up kind of slowing down for a bit, having children.
Yeah.
And it was a nice segue for me to be able to focus more on session work. And at that point, Dan Huff started producing country. Or he started producing. I can't just say country.
Right.
But he was playing on all the country stuff. He had moved to town, was playing on a lot of country stuff.
Right.
And playing on it quite well and producing. So when he would get a call, that he couldn't make, he would refer them to me. So I ended up playing on Reba stuff, and that was a transition. Transitioning from clubs to playing in big venues, that wasn't so hard. Playing on country stuff was different because, even though I grew up in Texas, I didn't really listen to country and didn't listen to it. I don't listen to it now, But I was being hired for the pop aspect of what I brought to the table.
Right.
And that took me a while to wrap my head around. I thought I was supposed to be a Brent Mason chicken picker guy. And it's just like, I'm not that guy, I'm not that guy. But I got enough under my, hands to where I could kind of go there enough to fake it, in a real way fake it, where they could use it, and they were like, yeah, that works for this song. But I started getting calls for country. My first session with Reba, I brought a Vox acoustic that it's called the Country Western model. I thought it'd be kind of funny,
Yeah.
And I had used it like on the DC Talk Jesus Freak album. We had tracked, using it on that. And it sounded great on that record. And I thought, hey, if I have to play some acoustic, I'll have it says country on it.
Yeah.
Nobody thought it was funny. Also, when my cartage guy set up my Bradshaw rig, they had a new guy that hadn't patched in a bunch of stuff in the back. I was getting no sound. And it was like, quick, take a picture. I want to remember the worst day of my life kind of a day,
Yeah.
But Reba was so awesome. And so much of the fact that I ended up going on the road with her later, and did that for several years. But just that transition into country, it's just such a different mindset.
Yeah.
Very narrow,
Can you?
At that time, very narrow.
Yeah. Can you explain that more? So be more specific on.
Yeah, musically, now you can't tell if something's country or not.
Right.
I guess until the hick guy starts singing,
Yeah.
But back then, 90s country and early 2000s country, it was pretty narrow, at the time. And session players that were on those dates would talk about hearing a Christian album and how cool it was and everything. And it wasn't as cool playing on the country stuff, but the people were great, the pay was awesome, and it sounded really good. There was some good music made, on country records then, and I was way happy to be a part of that.
So you're talking about the focus. So there was just limitations on the sounds
Musically,
you could provide, or the music on what you could play.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're on a Christian record date, that's not really saying. That's not a very defining term.
Yeah.
Yeah. It could be anything.
Yeah.
It could be country.
Yeah.
It usually isn't. It could be rock. It could be pop, alternative.
But especially a '90s country
Right.
session, you kind of had the Telecaster thing. You had somewhat of the Strat with chorus thing,
Right.
and
Yep.
you had
Yeah. So it was just another vocabulary to build up, and the musicianship of those players is off the chain. That's where I saw the big ears come out.
Okay.
All these players that do this day in, day out, they're listening to the singer like nobody's business. On Christian dates and stuff, a lot of times there'd be no singer. You just kind of had to guess where the vocal was, which is terrible. That's not making music. On these country sessions, it was like guys that had their chops together, had their sounds together, and everyone was listening to each other. And everyone was kind of self-arranging, self-producing in a way that I hadn't seen on regular pop sessions and Christian sessions. Yeah, I remember, early on, we got to a solo section, and Paul Line, the drummer that was on it, he's like, "Is it just me, or is this solo section too long?" And I was kind of like, can he say that? Are we allowed to voice our opinions on if something needs to change or whatever? And the answer was yeah, especially if it makes it better.
Right. Because on a pop session, normally the producer is much more controlling,
Right.
and wants you to implement what their idea was.
Right.
While on many country sessions, they tended to be where the players would have
Yeah.
more input.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of a casting call where
Yeah.
players were, you get the right chemistry of guys, especially for the particular songs that you've got, and let them drop in a quarter and get a song.
Yeah. So, what were some major things that you learned, technically, on these country sessions? Were there other players that you learned tricks from?
Well, it wasn't so much tricks. It's just, and I still have to work on this. We all do, is self-editing, kind of taking a big picture look, because number one, the song doesn't revolve around you. You're there to serve the song. You're there to make that artist and the song sound the best that it can. So, here you're sitting next to Dan Huff or Brent Mason or just all sorts of players that are so capable of so much, but they will edit it down to this simple little thing. But the way they lay it in, it's deceptively simple and deceptively awesome, when you get the final mix and stuff. And it makes the mix. That was one thing I remember working with Dan. It's just like, why is he always turned up louder than me? I'm thinking that. And then I started noticing on sessions, especially when you're playing with a steel player or a fiddle or whatever, chordal things move to the background, linear things move up. That's what catches people's attention. And so you can listen to country stuff today, and if you really listen, are some single line things that the guitars or electric guitars are playing in the choruses that sound, and they're very simple, and they're just little melodic lines that just kind of sit behind the vocal. But you take those out, and some of the interest of the song is gone.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I had to get used to, is playing a real simple I'm like, really? But if I were to hear it on the radio, I'd go, that sounds great.
Yeah.
But at the time, it doesn't feel great. So you have to get past that and realize that all those linear things really take the song to a new level, and they also get pushed up in the mix.
If you don't mind, would you give us an example of playing more chordal things versus playing something more linear, like on a chorus?
Yeah, well, let me get rid of that. So if I were playing something chordal, I could. And then somebody else would be going like, there's a 6 minor. You're just playing little single lines over you going, So those little single lines end up getting pushed up more than the chordal stuff, or even like rake. And sometimes I'll incorporate both, like what I just did. You'll play a chord, the melodic line, and you just make sure that it complements rhythmically where the main vocal is.
So with these lines that you're playing, are you still trying to stay out of the way of the vocal, or are you just okay?
And sometimes it's just a little weaving line that it's not on top of the vocal, because it never will be mix-wise.
Right.
But it always complements what's there. And it also kind of helps get it away from just chunking out chords and stuff. Yeah.
Just raking diamonds.
Yeah. And it's also effective when somebody else hops on that line with you. And that's common. You're on a session, hey, will you hop on this line with me? And play it for me. And you'll play that da 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 da.
Yeah.
And the steel will grab it. And suddenly it's a thing.
Right.
It almost becomes an event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's another playing concept that's been important to you?
When I started viewing the listener driving down the road in the car with the ability to turn the channel, the station, that really helped. So imagine your listener is driving down the road, song comes on.
Yeah.
So you usually put some kind of little hook on there, something where it's not just people playing chords, and they're like, okay, what's this? First verse, someone starts singing. They now know whether it's a guy or a girl, or a duo, So it's like, all right, this guy's singing. What's he singing about? They'll kind of check in, hear the thing. You get to the chorus, and there's kind of a payoff, and it's bigger, and makes you, okay, all right, you're listening. At that point, and you're about a little over a minute into the song, they've basically heard the song. Yeah. They know the intent of the song.
Yeah.
They know the melodic structure of it. They've heard the verse. They've heard a chorus. And except for that little hook thing in the intro, it's like, this guy's going to turn the channel if we don't do something quick.
Okay.
So you do a half turnaround to not bore him. You do a little shortened version before the second verse. And it's like, and that's where we'll start doing, little, chopstick. Guitars will get more rhythmic, and there'll be another element. A keyboardist will add an interesting sound. And I just envision that he's going, all right, they added something. It's like having a baby that they're going to cry, and you go, oh, no. Oh, look. Oh, and you dangle these things in front of them to try to keep them engaged.
Right.
And that second chorus hits, and hopefully it's got enough whatever to keep them, Then you hit them with either a solo, which only happens in country now, or you hit them with a bridge. Oh, wait, is this the same song?
Yeah.
You hit them with a bridge to keep them engaged, and they think, well, I've definitely heard this song now. I've heard a verse, I've heard a chorus, I've heard two verses, two choruses, I heard the bridge. Oh, wait, they broke it down. Wonder why they did that. It's gotten softer. We do all these little tricks to try to keep the listener engaged.
Yeah.
And try to keep them from crying and changing stations.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah,
It's a great way of looking at it.
I really keep that picture in mind. So I'm always, even before I hear the work tape, I'm thinking in terms of the intro. I'm thinking in terms of, all right, is there a little line or something I can play in the choruses? What can I do at that second verse?
Yeah.
Or what can I do at the very top to get them interested? And then the bridge. Holy crap, we got a bridge. Something's got to change.
Yeah.
So bridges either go, the drummer's it goes to toms, or it airs out, or whatever. So it's a constant, not battle, but it's a constant puzzle to try to keep that momentum going through a song and keep the listener engaged.
Yeah.
And I just envision them, okay. And you want them to hear it again.
Yeah.
You want them to hear that song yet again.
If you had to name the 3 or 4 people in this town that have done the most for your career, that have helped you the most, who would those guys be?
I would think, of course, Dan Huff. Definitely Dan.
Because he's referred you and you learned from him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had to learn his parts. And when I went out on the road, those early producers that I worked with, Brown Bannister, that produced, he's kind of like the Quincy Jones of Christian music.
Yeah.
He kind of looks like Eric Clapton, but he's kind of the Quincy Jones of Christian music. And then Keith Thomas is another.
Right.
Back in the day, Keith would spend 9 weeks on a song, on a single.
Wow. That's unheard of in our day.
But you heard it on the radio.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was heard on the radio. He would produce hits.
Yeah.
He would write hits, and you would come in, and I remember that he'd go, hey, yeah, here's a song I want you to play on it, and he'd play it for me, and I'd be like, oh God, why didn't you call me 6 weeks ago? it sounds like a finished, mastered, out the door hit. I have nothing to add to this. You know, that's how I felt.
Yeah.
And you know, you just try to find your little piece in that. You know, he was masterful at that. Working with Charlie Peacock, who's comes from so many different. He's hard to pin down stylistically. He does have a jazz background, and that comes through his music. But he's always wanting to stir it up. Kind of like in a Paul Simon kind of way. You know how
Yeah.
Paul Simon will
Yeah.
grab different influences and stuff? That's the way Charlie is too. And he'll keep you on your toes. And you're thinking, man, this is sounding pretty good. Oh, it's not right? Okay. Teach us the ways, you know. So we can all leave the dojo.
Yeah.
And I've been working with Charlie over 20 years. And he sent me some stuff just recently, the last couple of days. It's just like, thank you. Especially nowadays, and this can be the downer part of the interview. Nowadays, we're cutting radio singles and bad radio singles. Because if it's not a single, there's no money to be made on it. Because radio still pays, but there's not album sales, so you can't piggyback, 10 songs onto a hit and sell a product. That one song will go out there, and it'll be streamed, so the money's tight right there to begin with. But I talked to a hit songwriter here in town. He said if I get a song cut and it's not a single, he said I won't recoup my demo costs.
Wow.
Yeah, with a major artist. Yeah, like he won't make $500 on something that a major artist. Hey, so and so cut my song.
Yeah. And I lost money.
And I lost money. Yeah. So in an age where, in a day, where you're having to play on singles and bad singles, when you get something from some of these writers and a producer like Charlie, it's just like, okay, this is why I got into this. This is for the deeper level of music, not just to sell soap on the radio, but for this deeper thing here. So he's constantly saving me.
Hey folks, Bob Weil here at Truetone. Hope you're enjoying this episode of the Truetone Lounge. And if you like it, and if you're getting addicted to the lounge, please hit that YouTube subscribe button.
Jerry, let's talk effects. Let's talk gear. Let's talk all this flashing lights. And mess. So first off, you've got this Telly type guitar. Who made this?
This is Dan Strain and Matt Bunch. So it's a Danocaster.
Yeah.
I thought they should have gone with Strainocaster, but I could see how that would probably not fly from a marketing standpoint. Yeah. Danocaster. You don't have to play it strain to play it. It feels like you found the most amazing vintage guitar. This will be the guitar that will define who I am.
Yeah.
It's probably my best playing guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Out of several dozen guitars.
How did you find him?
I was on a session with Tom Bukovac and Kenny Greenberg. The three of us were worked a few days down in Music Row together, and Tom kept bringing out all these vintage guitars, great guitars, and Kenny and I were like, yeah. And Tom finally said, "Have you noticed I haven't brought out any Fenders?" And we're like, "Yeah, they've all been Gibsons or Gretches and stuff." And he goes, "It's because there's better guitars being made that outplay any vintage Fender. You won't find a better playing guitar than these."
So he brought out a few of his Danocasters, and it was just like, he's right, you know. So I'd known Dan for a long time. I used to go down to Broadway music consignments, and Dan worked around the corner years ago over at Nicholson's. And so I'd known him for a long time, and it helped shave some of the wait time off for the guitar, and I was able to get one. And I want for him to make Gretches and Gibsons, and because he just does they just do a better job. It's him and some other guys, but
Yeah.
yeah, I love it.
Cool. And so this kind of fulfills your late 50s, early 60s,
Yep.
kind of Steve Cropper, Mike Bloomfield, kind of,
Yeah,
telly thing.
yeah.
So while we got the telly, let's look at your board here. You've got variety of now you've got some some pedals that are kind of become Nashville standards.
Yep.
So what is it about the Nobles and the Mostortion that are just kind of ever present here?
Well, I can speak more to the Nobles. Why I like it. By the way, I'm exercising these old pots because otherwise they're kind of scratchy when you first turn them on. The Nobles and Tom Bukovac again turned me on to that. You don't lose any low end when you kick it in. In fact, bass players use them here in town because they can kick it in and they don't even have to blend it in. It just adds. It takes what they had. You do lose a little top. It's not a transparent overdrive, but it adds a low end in the right spot. I'm not even sure where it is, where the low end is, but it gives you a nice little bump, and the way it interacts with most amps, it takes it to that next level. And back in the day we still have them, but I would have either a channel switching amp or the Bradshaw, which would switch amp heads. I still kind of view it like that. Like the Nobles is kind of the next level of overdrive. So it's like if I kicked in a Vox head or something. Then distortion, it would be more like I would either use that or the Zvex Box of Rock to kind of get into the Marshall realm a little bit.
Yeah.
I've got the Dude on here for solo stuff. And then for extra crunchy, I've got a Friedman guy on there. And that position is kind of a revolving position between different pedals. So it's overdrive, distortion, heavier drive, and then lead tone. I usually have 4 pedals like that. I don't try to get one pedal to do everything.
Right.
It'll be specifically for one thing. The Mostortion's the interesting one, and that is you can set it to where when you kick it in, you don't hear the difference. But I use it for tone shaping more than anything. A big thing I use it for, especially if I'm using it with a neck humbucker, is to lock some of the low end off.
Okay.
Because I may want to. It's too muddy otherwise. Or if you're doing. It's just like. It just helps to shape the sound. Sometimes I'll use it to darken a pickup to make a small sound, but then you can also use it the other way as a true distortion, to goose everything up.
It's kind of like a distortion and EQ.
And EQ, yeah.
Because it's got the 3-band passive.
Yeah, and because it's a transparent overdrive or distortion pedal, you can set it to where, like I say, when you kick it in, you can't tell that you've kicked in a distortion pedal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these look kind of different because they've been rehoused by XTS. They're not.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've had different rehousing jobs done, and Barry look at it.
Yeah.
It looks like that was what it was supposed to be meant. And I like that it's tall because it sits above these guys.
Right.
So
then, let's see, you've got the EP booster. And
the EP boost is great for a telly because the back pickup can be a little thin almost for what I need it to be. Right now it's pretty overdrive. But it had a little bit of beef in the low end.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll use the SP compressor. I'll turn it down a little bit, and it's a parallel compression. So
Yeah.
it's not like a Dynacomp where everything's
Yeah.
It gives you some of the dry signal and then
Yeah.
some of the mixed in. Because I've got script logo Dynacomps, and they're just too much. There was the joke that there was a guy at the Opry that he used so much Dynacomp that when people told him to turn down, he would just play harder. And everything would just because a Dynacomp can crush your signal. So those guys are always on the board.
Yeah. And you've got the H9 and the Line 6 HX. This is a newer guy.
Yeah.
And this is kind of taking the place of their M9.
Yes, the HX, you can have 6 effects on at once. I think it's a better sounding unit fidelity wise than the M9. I never had any of my M9s, modded or anything. You could do that.
Yeah.
But when I go into to sessions, this thing has 128 banks. I use one of them, and I'll just use this main bank and just copy stuff down into it. So like I've got the harmonic trim. One thing I love doing is using it for like a low cut, just like that guy. For that, then so you can start a song off with that gag.
Yeah.
Starting off with a small sound, and then when you kick it out, it's big.
What are some of the other ones on here that you use a lot?
You mean in the HX?
Yes.
Well, here's what I did. By the way, the timing of this, the MIDI BPM, the timing of this guy, and also the tap tempo is controlled by this quartz. It's made in Australia. It sends out all sorts of. You can program it with a computer program to send out just about any kind of MIDI message, but it's kind of like the one stop for like somebody will say, oh, we're up to 97 now. Well, now these 3 units are in perfect sync.
Right. So now they're already locked in. So when you turn them on, they're already locked in.
They're already locked in place. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I use this guy a lot. I use it a lot to recall banks on the HX that I've pre-made some effects. So watch this. I'll go up here, and it'll do half BPM. So I've got a preset for that. But here's some delays that I can quickly go to: a quarter note, a deluxe memory man, eighth note, dotted eighth, a different kind of delay with no modulation, quarter, vintage, dotted. Here's another page with a slap, a dirty slap, digital things. This emulates my Nemesis delay. So what I'll do, I'll go up to these. Here's more complex, like it'll do a double delay thing. But I'll come up here and I'll go, I'll copy that one, and then I'll paste it down into that one preset bank that I use.
Yeah.
So, because when you recall effects on these units, it's the factory knob settings, and we move so fast in the studio. I don't have time to try to remember what my favorite settings are. I just store them.
Yeah.
Up here, I have different a page of tremolo.
Optical bias.
I don't know where I ever use that.
Yeah.
see, I can just pull one of those up. These are timed out, to the tempo wise, and I can just paste them down into that first preset. Here's a bunch of different flangers and stuff. Here's a really deep one. It's good for gags like a. That's a gag. Fast phaser. Now this is something I use quite a bit, and one thing that I do that I don't see a lot of guys doing is just ditching all the tone on your guitar, so all the tones rolled off.
Yeah.
A fast phaser. Add some delay to that. And I got into turning all the tone off from doing Evo stuff,
It helps to turn the tone down.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's like. So it's more flute-like. I do turn the tone up if I want to do, this kind of little.
Yeah.
I don't even know what you'd call that. But I love the tonal stuff that you get out of ditching all your top end. Almost sounds like a Fender Rhodes or something.
Yeah.
I keep a page of, vibratos and chorus.
Is chorus acceptable again?
Not really.
Yeah.
Sometimes now there's a lot of younger producers and stuff that really will want you to do the 80s thing.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? They wanted to go back to the 80s, and it's like, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's ready for that.
Yeah. But a lot of the older producers, they lived through it, and they
Been there, done that. Yeah.
they don't want to hear the chorus.
Yeah, exactly.
That's interesting.
Then it's got this EQ section where these are presets that I've come up with, and they're on these banks. So I do like a mid boost thing. Kind of like
Cocked wah.
cocked wah. Yep.
Yeah.
Can we say that? And then here's a high cut. We just did. That's the low end bit. Tiny EQ. And that's good if I need to make a patch where I don't have time to shift. I'll be grabbing the Evo and I can just
Yeah.
I use that. So the EQ section on the HX is really good. It's
Yeah.
got good verbs on it. There's actually some decent distortions on it, but I use these guys instead.
Yeah.
And some pretty cool, big muff stuff. I've got a 1972 Big Muff and a 77 Big Muff, and the stuff that's in there is pretty impressive.
Well, cool. And the H9, what do you use that for?
Just I don't have it pressed into surface like I want to just yet. I'm starting to get some patches that I really like on it. It's great for more expansive type stuff like that.
Wider sounds.
Yeah. Good landscape stuff. But also for landscape type stuff, and this Canyon pedal is a great delay pedal. I've got, it's Electro Harmonics Canyon, and I've got a little label on there because the type is so small that I had to make my own little cheat sheet on there. But it's got, really nice delays. does an interesting thing with reverse delays where it listens to where you're playing and will reline up the reverse. And most of the time it works. Doesn't always, but it's great for the. It takes some of the randomness out.
Yeah.
Let me see where I am tempo-wise. I got to play to the tempo. You know, it's not as random as normally that is. Also, there's a great ambient thing. I just pulled the tone back on my guitar. It's great for doing swell stuff, you know. I use that pedal all the time, the Canyon, especially because it tap tempos up so nicely with the quartz, with this Sailor quartz guy. And I've got a YouTube video on how I use all this stuff together with the quartz pedal. Because again, it gets back to how fast you can get to some of these sounds.
Yeah.
You know, and we move so dumb quick in the studio here.
You know, if you're taking a long time to get a sound,
Yeah.
they're like, what are you doing? You're
Exactly, you're burning
daylight.
time. Yep.
Yeah.
This is a gag, pure gag. The freeze pedal. So but I use it to like if there's a breakdown section and like say we're in A, you know, I'll do a thing up here. You know, it's almost like the reverse.
Yeah.
You know, doing something reverse in Pro Tools, but I can do it live. Also, it's great for like swell stuff. You know, that's no effects other than that, guys. So with delays, it's. Add some more of that Canyon pedal. It can get menacing, you know.
So you recently sent me a picture of a live pedal board because you had done some shows with Faith Hill and Tim McGraw.
Yeah.
I guess filling in for one of the guitar players.
Yeah, David Levita. Yeah, he had some health stuff that he's thankfully passed and everything.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing about a quarter of the tour. You
Yeah.
know, and it was one of those where you've heard the old stories about, yeah, my old man took me and threw me in the lake. It was kind of like that.
Yeah.
And that I flew in and got a sound check and got a good meal at catering, and then you're in front of 15,000 people playing the show.
Yeah.
No rehearsal.
Yeah. the pressure's on.
Actually, see, here was the good thing, and this doesn't always happen, but I had plenty of time to learn it.
Yeah.
And I learned no charts or anything. I mean, I made it my goal to be bored the first show.
Yeah.
And I was pretty bored.
Yeah.
I just went autopilot, click, and just played the show. It was a blast.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, just go out and have fun. It's like, when you know the material, it's fun.
Yes. And also, if there's problems, you're able to kind of play through it when
Yeah.
you know the material.
Yeah,
well.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Instead of being, I'm not loving my tone, or I happen
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
People can get distracted by those things and not realize that
Yep.
people paid a lot of money to come see the act play, and they want to hear the guitar parts, not a guitar player acting funny all night.
Yeah. Why is he bummed? Why
Yeah.
isn't he having fun? Yeah, so I did that, and I didn't take this board. I took a bigger board. There's such a difference between your live board and session
Okay.
board. Part of it is a session board, you're sitting down. The ergonomics of the layout and stuff is totally different.
Yeah.
Also, with a live board, if something's screwy, you need to be able to pull stuff up quickly, have room with cables and everything.
Yeah.
So it was very wide with not a ton of pedals on it.
Yes. Yeah, that was one of the things I noticed on it was that
All
it
the
was-
real estate.
Yeah, it was a large pedal, and I could and immediately that was one of the things I thought was, I bet it's large so that you can easily get to things.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And instead of the power supply being underneath, it was on top. And,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, when they put stuff in trucks, you got to be able to see what happened on that ride back from Albuquerque, you
Right.
know? You
Right.
got to be able to see if, cables made it and, all your patch cables and stuff.
Yeah.
And, we had a great crew, so they would catch any of that stuff. But it's just, you just want to get to catering,
Yeah.
You don't want to sit there and troubleshoot
Yeah,
stuff.
you don't want to be troubleshooting.
No,
stuff.
you want to be at catering.
Yeah.
Or hanging with the fellas, know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I ended up building. I listened to what the material was, some of the sounds that David had gotten, and I thought, well, I'll put my bent on it a little bit, but very basic stuff in that 4 different dirt pedals, Strymon delay, the timeline, the Strymon Mobius. Kind of a wide variety of the M9, which is a power hog.
Yeah.
And that's why I went down to Corner and asked, Todd Zilla, Todd, I need a power supply. And he turned me on to the 12, the CS12.
CS12.
Okay. And they're all, I've been building pedal boards forever.
Yeah.
And finagling power, and I'm used to having a power strip. I was trying to figure out, all right, where am I going to mount the power strip so I can have the dedicated power supply for this guy, because he doesn't like to be powered off a brick. The M9's a hog, so I'll use a Line 6 thing. So I was all prepared for that, and I brought the CS12 home, and the different chord length, I didn't have to take little pieces of whatever and tie up little loops.
Yeah.
It made, I was like, oh, I need to go from there to here. I couldn't remember what color it was, but it's like, all right, there's that.
There's the right one to use.
It was, I didn't use any other outside power supplies. I just used the CS12 and it did everything perfect. So I ended up buying a second one of those and putting it into another pedal board that I use on sessions. And then I have a little guy that has, remember the Adrenaline pedal,
Yeah.
the Roger Lynn pedal?
Yeah.
That's a bizarre power supply. And then a pitch shift pedal, which is another bizarre power supply. I bought a CS7 for that little satellite board.
Yeah.
So, they're great purchases. I've bought 3 of them,
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, seriously, I have to, especially like the HX, it's a hoss.
Yeah.
It's like 2 amps or 3 amps or something like that. Not milliamps. We're talking,
Yeah, it's-
the lights dimming when you turn it on.
It pulls a lot of power.
Yeah, especially on its boot up.
Yeah.
So the 12, I've powered it off the CS7 too.
Yeah.
It handles that with no problem. So I don't have to use their weird wall
Yeah.
wart thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
One-stop shopping.
Let's pull another one of your guitars.
All
Show
right.
us another main guitar.
Now, some of these guitars, I end up using just because it's like, oh, I didn't see that one coming. You know, you want to
Yeah.
kind of stir things up.
Yeah.
This Fender Jaguar is one of those guys. It's a newer guitar. One of the guitar players in Paramore, I've known him since he was a young kid. I think he's been playing one of these. I don't know if he still does. But I thought it was a good pick for me because you can switch up to this upper neck pickup and have the tone all the way off. Just with a switch.
Right.
Instead of having to grab the tone. So I like that. There's a split coil thing on here. I ended up putting an Evertune bridge on here. And that was at the advice of David Levita, the guy with Tim
Yeah.
and Faith. And he's an LA guy. The first time I played with him, we played an awards show with Faith. He had a 335 with one on it. He flew in from LA, pulled it out of the case, strapped it on, and just started playing. And he's perfectly in tune. I look down his pedal board, there's no tuner. I'm like, why do you not have a tuner? He goes, oh, I use this.
Yeah.
He goes, and this guitar sat in a cold warehouse overnight. And it was like, spang! And I was like, what is this Evertune that you speak of? So I use them as rhythm guitars in the studio and also for TV date guitars where you're
Yeah.
not having, I set them to bend, you know. This one is, no, this one isn't set to bend. I think the Les Paul I have set to bend. When you're going to go do a TV date, there's nothing more frustrating than the unforgiving nature of TV and being on camera for 3 minutes out of tune.
Yeah.
And give you a good example, this Les Paul that was in the flood, it was ruined in the flood, but I had it redone by Glaser Instruments. I had them put an Evertune on it, and I went, when David Letterman, remember when he was on TV, he had the David Letterman show.
Yeah.
I did the Letterman show with Chris Cornell and with Joy Williams from Civil Wars. They did a song for a soundtrack of, what was it, 7 Years a Slave, whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
That movie.
Yes.
Chris had written a song called Misery Chain, and it's an amazing song. And he came into town, and we recorded it with him, got to work with him in the studio. And then Charlie, said, hey, they want to go up to Letterman and play this live. So we went up there. You go from a hot dressing room to a stage that is set at 48 degrees.
Yeah.
And that Les Paul was tuned down a whole step. I was playing out of G position, but the song was in F. An unwound G down a step
Yeah.
from a hot dressing room to it would have been a disaster.
Yeah.
But it was just like shing. It was joyous. It's kind of otherworldly that you could get away with that.
Yeah.
And you can bang on them and they're just like boom. They don't do that. They don't do that
Yeah.
sharp excursion thing.
Right.
So when I'm on sessions, to get that first part down and to move on to the next guy, because you're going to be asked to do an overdub right after that, I don't have to worry about tuning or whatever. It's just like bang out that first track, and then pick up the guitar non-Evertune, and you know that you've got this nailed pitch, rhythm part, because back in the days of tape and if you were doing a rock record especially, you could be punching just about every bar.
Yeah.
You would tune for the next chord, and you would punch that, and it kind of sounds that you already did that,
Wow.
Yeah,
Neat feature.
yeah, it's a wonderful feature. And I think some guys think, well, does it change the sound? Yeah, when they're in tune, they really sound different. And they do take a lot of wood out of the guitar.
Okay.
But, did it change the sound? I don't know.
But it's in tune.
But it's in tune.
Yeah. And so you have to have one set up to where it's not meant for bending.
Well, here's the deal. Like, I'll flatten this.
Wow.
There it is. So look at this. There it is. 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 There it is.
So you finally keep
Yeah.
raising it until it changes pitch. There. So now you can, or
Wow.
Crazy.
so you can set it to bend, and
Yeah.
I'll try to keep it kind of on the cusp of
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
but still where I can just like bang through. For power chords,
Yeah.
I can tune that Les Paul down to I can drop the whole tuning and do a drop C, and hammer it
Yeah.
just as hard as you can play, and it's just like
Right on.
just
It.
yeah, it's awesome.
Show us another one.
All right. So this guitar I didn't really care for when I first got it. I did and I didn't. I cared for the guitar. It's a straight off the rack Eric Johnson
Okay.
Strat.
Yeah, the no string tree.
Yeah, no string tree. And I used to have a 1961 Sunburst Strat. I ended up selling it to Bukovac.
Okay.
And so I was kind of looking for another Strat to take its place. I demonstrated some Pigtronics effects in a booth one time at one of the shows.
Yeah.
And I just showed up and they handed me this guitar and I spent the day playing it. And afterwards I was just like, I think I'm going to have to buy this guitar. And thankfully they sold it to me. I don't think there's anything really special about it. It's just an off-the-rack guy.
Yeah.
But it's so versatile. I love the spanky back pickup, especially for rakes and stuff. Like it just the neck, everything about it is just right. And at first I was like, oh, I'm definitely changing out the pickups.
Yeah.
But I would get on a session and somebody go, man, what guitar is that? And I go, it's the guitar I'm thinking about changing the pickups. I did a record with Chris Isaac. Remember that
Yeah.
guy, the
Yeah. Yeah. Wicked game.
Wicked Game, yeah.
Yeah.
But I did a record with him and that Paul Worley produced here in town. And we kept going back to this guitar. I had all these other cool, weird guitars.
Yeah.
And I have a 1960 335 dot neck, with factory Bigsby, and all these cool guitars and stuff. And the Guitar Center Strat, okay, because it sounded perfect for his stuff.
Yeah.
And I like the tone control and the neck. Perfect for the EBO stuff and for the, It's just a great little versatile guitar, but I'm going to hang on to this because I usually don't sell stuff.
Yeah.
I got to get a Dan Strain version of a Strat. I gotta have that.
Cool. Show us another one.
All right. This guitar, it's like, oh, ho-hum, it's a PRS. They're great guitars. Love the way they lay them out to where the string passes over the nut.
Yeah.
But in 2010, we had a big flood.
Yeah.
And I had 17 guitars underwater. Most of them didn't make it. I had amps, that big rig with the pedals and rack stuff,
Yeah.
dead,
Gone.
gone.
Yeah.
You just had to.
Yeah.
All that stuff was insured, so I took the insurance check, and all that stuff was gone. But in the wreckage of all that stuff down there, there was a Strat, a Dave Grissom PRS that had been signed by, it was a gold top, been signed by Buddy Guy, and a Klein that all belonged to Dave Grissom. He had a storage locker down there. And I was down there, we were basically triaging guitars.
Right.
Joe Glazer was down there saying, everything was soaked.
Yeah.
And he said, here's what's going to happen. This stuff swells, and then over the next few days when it dries out, it'll contract, but the metal doesn't. So it'll contract around that metal, and it'll basically split a headstock. Or anywhere where there's metal, you run the risk of it splitting the guitar up.
Yeah.
So I offered to take, because I'd worked with Dave in the studio. He's a wonderful person. I offered to take his guitars, and I brought them back here, got a 6-pack of Coronas, and sat here and took those guitars apart, took every piece of metal off his Grissom that had been signed by Buddy Guy. He had just done a tour with Buddy.
Yeah.
So he wanted that saved, and also this custom Strat that he had built. Took every piece of metal off, got his Klon out, everything was filthy.
Yeah.
And I have a picture of his Klon sitting in my bathtub underwater. And it took a while for all that stuff to dry out, and you do it slowly over time. And it ended up, everything lived. And then in the mail, I got this. He sent this for me.
So Dave Grissom sent you one
He
of his...
sent me one of his guitars, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty freaking awesome.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
So
it's classy with the black with the
I love it.
maple binding. And
Yeah. So it's a way of saying thanks. And anytime I have to do a solo or something, this is a good go-to guy for that.
yeah.
And while we're on the subject of the flood, this guitar was in the flood. It's got the big ugly Evertune bridge on it. The one that's on it, I've got one with it on a telly that's way nicer looking. The Jaguar is really great looking. This is kind of bulky, but it does such a great job. But this top was just ruined.
Yeah. Swelled and...
Yeah, and I took it, I was like, and Dave Graff had picked this guitar out for me, and they got it to live and everything. And I've always been a mini humbucker in the neck kind of a guy, so
Yeah.
I did that years ago.
Yeah, that's a neat modification because you get the the kind of brighter, more focused magnet sound of the smaller pickup.
Yeah, I've done this to a few of my Les Pauls where I've got a mini in the neck,
Yeah.
and then the full humbucker in the back.
So did you have to have this pickup surround made or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And the guys down at Glazer did it, but I wanted a Les Paul that had the Evertune in it for that speed factor on sessions.
Yeah.
And I took Joe 3 Les Pauls, and I said, all right, out of these 3, which one do we hack up? And he said, man, definitely do the flood one. It's already been, how can you hurt it any more than it already has?
Yeah.
So we stuck it in there, and that's the one I used on the Letterman show with Chris Cornell and on the recording of the song we did. And it's been a hoss. Oh,
Yeah.
some old
Gaff tape.
some old gaff tape from years ago.
I mean, it still looks great though.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
I had a Duesenberg, the John Platania model or whatever.
Okay.
It was underwater. I have a picture of me pouring water out of it,
Yeah.
out of the hole.
Yeah.
All the paint popped off the neck, the back of the neck,
Uh-huh.
but everything else was perfect.
Yeah.
So they sprayed the neck and went on, like nothing happened.
Continues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I've still got some things that I haven't had rebuilt from the flood, and it's been 8 years because I'm
Yeah.
afraid they're not going to come back.
Yeah. All right, now let's talk amps.
Okay.
Now I've got to preface this by, you've got all these amps here,
Yeah.
and then tell us about this ingenious invention that you came up with that you actually have a patent on.
All right. So I've always, instead of buying a clone of something, I'll try to buy the real deal and investigate why is that, why is a Marshall in the history of sonic, the sonic palette. So I've ended up with a bunch of amp heads over the years, and I love them. It's just I needed a quick way to be able to get around them, to be able to use them. If you can own gear, but I wanted to be able to use gear,
Right.
And I do programming for Native Instruments. They have a program called Guitar Rig, and it's all virtual where you just click and hey, there's a Marshall, and hey, there's a microphone, and hey, I'm moving the mic.
Yeah.
And I really was intrigued by that, and I wanted to be able to quickly get around to these different amps. Like I said to you earlier, you can walk in someone's studio and they'll have some cool amp,
Yeah.
and it's sitting there, and you're like, "Hey, that's a cool amp." And they go, "Yeah, it really sounds good," you know.
Yeah. But no one picks it up and puts it
No one
up.
picks it because you have to pick it up,
Yeah.
find a place for it,
Yeah.
mic it up. So you have to take the mic off of something else,
Right.
and it may not be right. So you use the thing that covers a bunch of bases instead. You know.
So you use your Deluxe Reverb or Tweed Deluxe or
Yeah.
something like that instead of pulling another. Yeah.
Exactly. So I wanted to be an amp user and not just an amp collector.
Yeah.
But the Marshall I bought up in Albany, New York, God, ages ago. In fact, the day I bought that, it was at Lark Street Music, I think was the name of the place up in Albany. That night, I met Jack Nicholson, the actor.
Yeah.
This was when they were shooting this movie. This was ages ago. Shooting a movie called Ironweed
Okay.
with Meryl Streep. And I was with Gary Chapman. We were opening for Bruce Hornsby on Bruce's first tour
Yeah.
with Mandolin Rain and That's
Yeah.
Just the Way It Is, all that.
George Marinelli playing
Yeah,
guitar.
George Marinelli was on
Yeah.
guitar,
Yeah.
who was my neighbor for a good while here in Nashville. But I found that, and it's been with me ever since. You know,
Yeah.
the Deluxe Reverb. It was originally in the cabinet. The cabinet is in my amp room. The head is up here. It was in Houston. A friend of mine, Chuck Sugar, had it forever. And I would every few years I'd call him up or I'd hit him with an email. Hey, still got that amp? Yeah. Interested in selling it? No. Okay. A few years later, you know, I hammered him over the years, and he finally said, "Okay, I'll sell it."
Yeah.
This I bought from Bukovac. He got it from Brent Mason. Bought this from Book, the Matchless, 94 Matchless, I think. This custom audio head was one of the first custom audio heads when they first came out, and it was underwater. It was down there, and it came back to life, as did this 90s Vox AC-15. It was underwater, came back to life. This is the electronics out of the AC-30 that I have in my amp room. It's a 65, and it's a
Okay.
top boost. It's very bright. It's very wanting to get it, but it's got that chimey sound that you just
Yeah.
get from the Vox, you know. And I found that on the road years and years ago. So I wanted to be able to get around to these different amps quickly. So here in my studio, I found a spot to have an amp room built where it's pretty much soundproof, and I had all these cabinets in there, and I thought, okay. Just like in Guitar Rig, I'll have 3 mics on a cabinet, you know, and that way I can get differences in sound. And so 10 cabinets, 3 mics, that's 30 mics.
Yeah.
And I wanted ribbons on that. Buying 10 ribbon mics,
Yeah. That's a fortune.
that's a fortune. And you'd also have to have some elaborate patch bay and stuff. And so I was trying to figure out, well, how do I do this? How do I get around, you know, to all these amps? And it wasn't until I was like, you know, I'm just going to pretend I own one microphone, and I want to mic up 10 different cabinets. You know, how do I go about doing that? And, you know, and I was like, how do I, and then finally I realized, well, okay, I'll get some kind of motorized thing and stick a mic on it. And I remember reading about Billy Gibbons having an amp cabin in the studio where all his amps faced in and he had one mic in the middle.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, I'll kind of do a little bit of that concept, but I'll have the mic on this motor. I just got to find a motor that works right. And I searched around and found, I would buy motors off the internet and they'd come in, I'd go, yeah, this will work. Didn't work, I'd just chunk it. Found a pair of servo motors that you can use, and it's slow enough and programmable. I was able to design up a joystick controller. So what I have now in my amp room are all these speaker cabinets in a circle, one big
Yeah.
circle. Servo motor is in the exact middle. all these, I don't mix amp heads and cabinets.
Yeah.
This goes to a blonde basement cabinet. This
Right.
goes to it's a 67 50 watt plexi with a tube rectifier, so it's an export model. It goes to a 71 Marshall 412 with, I think they're gray back instead of green backs.
Right.
So that goes to its dedicated cabinet. The deluxe reverb, which I put in this case, goes to its dedicated 112.
Right.
This goes to a Dr. Z 4-ohm cabinet. It's a 410 cabinet.
Okay.
This goes to a 212, another 412. This goes to its respective cabinet, the AC30.
Yeah.
This goes to the AC15 with a bluebell in it.
Yeah.
So what I'm able to do, and I don't know if how clearly you can see this, but I can now, I've got a camera mounted on there.
Yeah. So right now, what are you plugged into?
To the matchless.
Okay. So the whole time you've been into the matchless.
Into the matchless.
Into this cabinet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you can hear the H9 for one, but now that that's off.
Oh wow.
If it's too bright, you move the mic.
That is amazing.
Especially on heavier tones, it gets, because there's so much rich harmonics.
Right.
So, give you an example, I can recall positions on this. So now it's on this custom audio. Let me switch guitars real quick. I use the radial JD7 to route the guitar signals to their amp heads.
Right.
So I can just, pop these little buttons in and out. And that routes it to the respective heads.
Yeah.
And, let me make sure this is off of standby. You hear all these different harmonics? Because sometimes there's not enough presence on an amp, so rather than messing with the knobs, rather than pulling up an EQ or whatever for it, I'll move the microphone and find that spot.
Yeah, you're able to do that, and then you're able to completely change sounds, not just heads into the same cabinet, but you've got different cabinets
Yeah.
and different heads, and the proper cabinets to go with each head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're back to the.
And again, that's the matchless.
That's the matchless. Back to the custom audio.
Yeah.
So when I do overdubs, and I learned this from a British engineer that did. He and another engineer would kind of flip-flop working on the AC/DC records. He didn't do Back in Black. He did the one before it and the one after it. They would kind of flip-flop stuff.
Yeah.
But I showed him this, and he said, when we do the AC/DC records, he said, every guitar part, every overdub gets its own sound. It's like when they get a guitar part, they tear that down,
Yeah.
try a different amp, different miking, different part of the room,
Yeah.
and everything gets its own space. And so you don't get this flattened out, one-dimensional thing, because a speaker is basically like a comb filter. And there's a really great guitar player here in town, Paul Allen. You know Paul? He does the 10-finger orchestra bit thing, and he's just a brilliant player. He was over here one time, and he said, well, since you've got all these amp heads, let's hear all these amp heads through one cabinet. And so I kind of set them similar.
Yeah.
But you've got the custom audio. You've got a 1965 Vox. You've got a 67 Deluxe Reverb. You've got all these different amps, and we plugged it into this 212, and he would play a little bit. I'd record it.
Yeah.
I'd move I'd move that the speaker cable to the next amp head.
Yeah.
We heard 8 different amp heads into the same cabinet. You could barely tell them apart.
So it homogenized the sound.
It's unbelievable.
So much of the sound is part of the
speaker.
cabinet and the speaker. Yeah.
So when I do overdubs for people, a lot of times each overdub is like, oh, done with that.
Yeah.
And I'll swap over and let's move. And I'll call up a different amp.
So now we're let's see, what are we going to? Now we're going to the Tweed Deluxe, or we keep going?
Well, let's see.
Dun dun dun.
It's the Blonde Bassman.
It's the Blonde Bassman cab. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I use this to switch to the Blonde Bassman. Let me see if it's off standby. Yeah. So it's very clean, you can see.
Yeah.
So, guys will say, my mattress doesn't clean up very well.
Yeah.
Well, then don't use it for those clean parts. Get an amp that sounds good clean.
Yeah. That's so fantastic that you have that you can offer when when someone's sending you tracks. It's like
Yeah.
you have all these different tonal options they're all legit,
Right there.
they're all proper, and they're right there.
Yeah, and so your overdubs don't just end up sounding like one big guitar. There's a depth to
Yeah.
it because of the cabinets,
Yeah. The different speakers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've also got a gadget on your Tweed Deluxe
Yeah.
that's fun, because that's one where the amp is actually out there. The head isn't separated.
Yeah,
out.
the electronics are out there.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets admittedly a little geeky.
Yeah. If it wasn't geeky enough
If it wasn't
already.
geeky enough already.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go to the Tweed Deluxe. Da 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 da. Thank you. We're here.
Yeah.
All right, so the electronics are down there.
Yeah.
All the other amps, all the electronics are up here. Speaker
Right.
cabinets are in the amp room.
Right.
But I didn't want to separate the Tweed Deluxe out, and I have a Tweed Champ down there, and then
Yeah.
a little Marshall studio thing from the '80s.
Yeah.
But that meant that I would have to foot it down there to
Yeah.
turn the knobs and stuff.
Yeah.
So I started doing stuff like, if I'm going to be geeky, let's be totally geeky.
Yeah.
So I found there's radio controlled parts and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I found these motors that people use for sailboats, for reeling in the sails, and they don't do a full 360, but they do enough of a range for what I need for
Right.
guitar, for my amps. So I built it where the motor is mounted over the knob. I've got Velcro, one side of the Velcro on the motor. The other side of the Velcro I just stick on the knob, the old
Yeah.
Tweed knob. And it's mounted over that. I found a board that translates MIDI to servo voltage. And so I can use a MIDI controller to control the little servo guy. So and I probably wouldn't ever use it that gained up.
Yeah. But that's up to 12 or something like that. Yeah.
So, like I can move it more towards the center where it's brighter.
Yeah.
Turn the volume down. Make sure the tone is up, and I get it. Then, if I want to gain it up, I'll usually move it to where it's a little bit darker. Turn up that volume. Turn down the tone. But it's that combination of the tone control, the volume. Otherwise, without the mic mover, it would be too, and without this tone guy, it'd just be a little bit too raspy sounding.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've also got that on the Champ. So I can pretty much turn it all the way down. Here it goes, gained up. That nasty? Yeah, I can sit here and do this all day, and I do. Yeah, so that's the geekier side of things right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Well, Jerry, thank you so much for letting us invade your home, your
Absolutely.
home studio, and thank you for letting us. Thank you for telling your story.
Yeah. Oh, one last thing. This guy. Also have a Leslie down. And this Leslie was made during the World War II where they couldn't use magnets, so it's an electromagnetic woofer. The best Leslie effect is a Leslie, that.
Thanks for watching the Truetone Lounge. Make sure and subscribe so you never miss an episode.